see about that. See what to do here. Good afternoon. The February 5th meeting of the Oklahoma City Water Utilities Trust will be in order, and the first matter on the agenda is the approval of the minutes from the January 15th meeting.
Move to approve the minutes.
Second. Motion and a second to approve the minutes. Are there comments, questions, additions, corrections? Hearing none, voting please. The minutes are approved. Before we go into the consent docket, we have agreed to continue the matter concerning the Quail Ridge matter for 2 weeks. I had contacted the attorney that represents the people, the property owners, and so unless it's absolutely necessary, we would like to just go ahead and defer those on the front side and not, and we're really deferring it because I've discovered what may be a possibility to try to find another location. It's premature to be optimistic about it, but it's certainly worth pursuing given the perception that the people around the proposed site have. So. Unless there's some, and there are some people have signed up to speak.
Well, they're actually here about the noise study, which is E.
Okay. But all those matters will be continued until the next docket. So, and they are what's the numbers of them again?
Yes, E, F, and G. Yes, Roman numeral.
Oh, they're Roman numeral 5, E, F, and G. I would entertain a motion to continue those.
Second.
Have a motion and a second to continue those for 2 weeks to the next trust docket. Are there comments or questions? Voting, please. Those matters are continued. We do have a period of time at the end of the agenda where a citizen can be heard if you want to stay. I don't know that serves any real useful purpose, but certainly you're welcome to utilize that period of time if you want to talk. But I think it'd be better to put it all at the same time. Next item is item 3. It's a consent docket. There are a number of matters on the consent docket.
Move approval subject to individual consideration.
I'll second.
Have a motion and a second to approve all the items on the consent docket subject to individual consideration. Is there anyone wishing to discuss any of these matters separately? Hearing none, voting please. Consent docket's approved. Next item is item 4.
Move approval subject to individual consideration.
Thank you. Do you have a second?
Second.
Have a motion and a second on the concurrence docket. Is there any need to discuss any of those matters separately? Hearing none, voting please. Concurrence docket is approved. Next item is item 5. There are a number of matters to be considered separately, and the first item is item 5A. It's an amendment to a professional service contract with InPipe Technology.
Move approval.
Second.
Motion and a second to approve item 5A. Are there matters to be discussed, comments, questions? Hearing none, voting please. 5A is approved. Next item, item 5B. Terminate a professional service contract with NRP Group, Inc.
Move approval. Second.
Motion and a second to approve item 5B. Are there matters to be discussed on that? Hearing none, voting please. Item 5B is approved. Item 5C is a resolution authorizing the general manager to approve additional application for support services by Axon concerning enhancing the billing system.
Move approval.
Second.
We have
It's $79,000. Yes. What we're working on is rate options that we can build into the billing system that will help us with conservation.
Any other comments? Hearing none, voting, please. Item 5C is approved. Next is the annual financial report and management letter on internal controls concerning the trust.
Move approval.
A motion and a second on item 5D. Are there comments from the trust or staff or?
Mr. Chairman, the auditors did find some things booked differently than they expected. That's been corrected on the city side. I think we're back in life is good. Our
Any further comments? Hearing none? I thought we did. Have a motion? We do. A motion and a second. 5D is approved. Next three items, E, F, and G, have all been continued for 2 weeks. The last item on the regular docket is executive session with regard to litigation concerning Sardis Water. We do not need an executive session.
No, sir.
Correct?
Thank you.
Have a motion to strike that.
Second.
Voting, please. That matter stricken. Next item, item from trustees. Mr. Graves. Have any comments?
Mr. Chairman, I have a comment on the step we took last week to go to every other day watering. Are there some additional steps we could take in that same vein that aren't emergency so much as to try to get the idea people need to conserve water?
yes, sir. Bring you continuing discussions about that and bring you recommendations at your next meeting.
Before we adopt a process of charging people more for the water they use at the later end in high blocks, I think we need to explore some of these other matters as well.
Agreed.
And I think we ought to focus also not just on the residential customers, but on our commercial customers. They're big water, some of them are big water users, and they may have the ability to reuse some of that water, recycle it. They may have ability for wells, and so we need to have them explore that. And as I say, it's not an emergency. It's a conservation learning curve that we're trying to get people to step onto. So, thank you.
Yes, sir. And on today's docket, you did approve an engineering report to help us expand our treated wastewater reuse program. So the consultant will look at ways we might enhance that. We already are averaging about 8 million gallons a day of treated wastewater, which is a good amount, about 10% of what we're generating in this very dry weather. Looking to grow that some more and potentially reuse it in the water system.
Any other trustees? I have a comment. It's one I tend to make from every other Tuesday from now on, and it has to do with the conservation aspect of this. I think it is very important that we make sure that what we're doing is perceived as conservation. These are permanent type changes. They're not temporary changes responding to some crisis. They are permanent measures to try to conserve water, and we just need to be aware that we need to phrase press releases or statements any of us make to the press that that's the situation. This is not a response to a crisis. It's just a new paradigm, a new way of looking at things, and I just think that's important that the public understand that that's what this is about. General Manager's reports. First is a staff update regarding Aquat Series 2013 bond sale and ratings reports.
Mr. Chairman, under General Manager reports today, we just have a couple of things. We were successful in maintaining our existing bond rating and are proceeding toward a sale, beginning with some pricing conversations late this week and early next week. I'm giving you some additional information about what we're doing related to the drought. Staff has prepared using the tools that the billing system allows us and standards that we get from water utilities, some concepts about how rates impact usage. there are many things, going to item number 3 under reports, there are many factors that influence water use, including awareness and action, awareness about how you use water and what your plants need, pricing structures are a piece of it potentially, restricted use times are a piece of it, and also, of course, enforcement is a piece of what other utilities pursue when they look at whether it's a short-term or long-term conservation program. So Brett Weingart and Leo Z have done some work related to how pricing impacts conservation, and with your indulgence, Brett will show you some of the outcomes that they found, again, using the billing system and practices that are available to water utilities.
Good afternoon, Chairman and Trustees. Second page. What we have done is taking a look at our existing uniform rate. We charge the same amount of price per 1,000 gallons regardless of the amount of water we use right now, and that rate is currently $2.55 a 1,000 gallons. Looking at the American Water Works Association has a series of manuals. One of their manuals is M1, which deals with rates and how you should calculate rates. And in that manual, it discusses the possibility of inclining block rates, declining block rates, uniform rates, seasonal rates, and drought surcharge rates. And so this example we're showing you today is optional ways to implement a drought surcharge rate. It has been discussed as an effective tool for sending price signals to customers because it materially increases the cost of water above what they traditionally have been used to, and the portion that you increase it is using your judgment. In this situation, we've tied it to the percentage reduction in use that by policy would be established. So there are 4 different policy options: 10%, 12%, 20%, and 30%. So you can see the range of percentage reductions that could occur and the types of pricing that could be employed to provide the pricing signal. Another factor, if you could stay on that slide, another factor that's important is that whenever we have a conservation program where we reduce use, you end up with less revenue unless you come up with a revenue neutral option. Each of these options is designed to be roughly revenue neutral. But like we say, this is judgment. The way that customers respond will be variant based upon income levels and how sensitive they are to our educational efforts and enforcement. Studies have shown that as customers' income rises, they are less responsive to price signals, and so enforcement can help in that area. The analysis data was performed using data from the billing system from 10 of 2009 to 9 of 2010 for this analysis as a typical period comparable to what we might experience this summer. Next slide. One of the things that you usually do when you are initiating the work of figuring things out, what you should do with customers and their usage patterns, is something called a bill frequency analysis. So when you look across the top side on the left of the bar, that's the occurrences that we experienced in the billing system for that period of time, showing how many bills went out for inside city single-family customers. And so you can see the most came out with customers around 3,000 gallons. So we sent the most bills out for customers using 3,000 gallons. And when you look at that curve, you can see that from about 10,000 gallons or less, most residential customers are captured in that amount of use. So we're talking about relatively small amounts of change for most customers. Maybe 1,000 gallons here, 1,000 gallons there. But you also see people that are using water in increasing amounts above 10 each month, but they're relatively small in comparison to the larger group. Next slide. From our analysis, we found that December, January, and February months, if we took those months for all of our customers, residential, commercial, industrial, all customers, 70% of our annual use occurs at a consumption level equal to or less than the type of average winter consumption that they would have. So we have a small amount of use in comparison to most cities that is considered typically your discretionary or outdoor use. So by and large, our customers are not using a lot of water outdoors. Now, everyone can see that there are examples that we can approach where people are using larger amounts of water, watering in the rain, watering on the street, watering when it's freezing weather. But when you see those are usually around thoroughfares. They're not predominant throughout all of our customers. The outdoor use is typically, of course, above AWC, but you have also commercial and industrial customers that have cooling towers. And so that 30% includes cooling tower use in seasonal warmer weather periods. It also includes production changes. As an example, you might sell more pop if you're a pop production company in the summer compared to the winter. So the whole 30% is not naturally going to be savings, and we can't expect to save all of that water, but we can save part of it while also focusing on things that can be done with plumbing changes and production changes. But of course, those take longer to see the results of those. Next slide. From the American Water Works Association choices, and you saw in your packet the various choices that are available for drought surcharge, we picked the individualized volumetric surcharge, which means that each individual customer's own individual average winter consumption is used as a starting point, as the base. So each customer gets a commensurate signal on increasing their rate based upon a comparison to their winter use. For example, if I have 7,000 gallons average winter consumption, then the amount of water that I would use above 7,000 would carry me into the second block and then eventually into the third block on an inclining block rate structure. Whereas someone else may have an average winter consumption. If they have larger family, they might have 10. So they would get 10 at the lowest bulk block rate, where I would get 7, and then they would increase. As they increased, they would get charged the second block and then the third block. Another thing that we have is that when you see these charts, you will see something called a trigger. The trigger is just another way of looking at the percent savings. As an example, when we use 3.1 for the trigger and we use 10% savings, which means that you could, in this analysis, customers could use up to 3.1 times their average monthly winter consumption before they would get to the third block. When you go to an increased amount of savings, then the trigger number gets lesser and lesser because you're multiplying it by the average winter consumption. So when you get to the most restrictive use, the AWC becomes 1, which means all use above your average winter consumption to save 30% would have to be at the highest rate. Next slide. This example right here is each of the 4 options. So you see options 1 through 4. 10% mandatory water restriction would get us to block 1 would still remain at $2.55 a thousand gallons, the rate inside city customers are paying now, up to their average winter consumption level. Then it would go to $3.83 and eventually to $5.74. The water that would be priced at $5.74 would be the portion of use that's 3.1 times or greater than their average winter consumption. Block 2 would be the use between 3.1 times and their average winter consumption. And then, of course, block 1 is their average winter consumption. And it increases, the rate increases as you go more and more restrictive, as your policy sets a greater conservation policy amount to 4. Now, when you get to 4, unfortunately, since 30% would be the goal, and we've found that 30% of the use is above your average winter consumption, the only thing left to do is increase Block 1 and then set a surcharge rate that's fairly large for the remaining use. Now,
How will we let people know that we're entering into these restrictions? Will we announce this is 30% for the next month, or is it weekly, or?
normally, these are established and they last for a significant period of time.
For the season?
For the season.
Okay.
Now, you can see these set up in stages where you become stage 1, stage 2, stage 3, things like that. But because these are changes to the billing system and they have to be tested before they can be implemented, it can take sometimes 60 days to go from let's do it to we're ready to do it and we're implementing it. So these are not things that you would adjust every month, go up, ramp up. The best thing to do would be to pick a percentage reduction and live with that for a period of time and then combine that with education and with enforcement to move people's behavior to where you want them to go.
What would be a scenario in which we would be looking at a 30% restriction?
Drought continue to have, and we actually define a shortfall in water volume available for customers would be, I believe, go to that level of restriction.
I guess in current terms, are we at a point today where we would need to implement a 30% restriction?
No, sir.
How much worse would it have to get?
And that's the information that we owe you. I appreciate in this case we have the cart before the horse, wanting to introduce the concept while we bring you back additional information.
Okay.
So this gives you the range of values that you could see. These ranges of values ignore the responsiveness of the customer. And normally you would expect that the responsiveness of the customer would be not 100%. If we earn revenues in Block 3, those revenues normally would be dedicated to pay-as-you-go capital improvements because there are future adjustments planned. They take those into account and they forestall the demand for additional rate adjustments in the future so that they can achieve cost recovery and not over-recover. Next slide. On the next slide, what we were able to do is show that your average winter consumption level for all customers is in green. In red, you see as the restrictions occur. Now, unlike the previous graph where we went 1 through 4, this chart you read from the bottom up. So you see the target of 3.1, that's your target, your trigger. So the 3.1 goes with the 10% reduction, whereas the 1.0 AWC on the left would go with the 30% policy reduction in use. And the red shows the portion of use that you're targeting to discourage or eliminate by the pricing and enforcement and education program. So you see less and less use above your average winter consumption being allowed, and the gold color is the Block 2 use. Next slide. Although each individual customer is targeting at a different, unique, customized average winter consumption based on their own historic use, this chart is designed to show you where we get above the 2.5 line on the bar. You see that's the 10% reduction, and then when you get to the red dashed line, you get to the 30% reduction. You see how we are progressively saving water and restricting use and compressing use as you go further and further down into the process, with the goal that we discourage as much as possible outdoor use in the summer, because that is the more discretionary, more immediate savings that can occur, while we work on other savings that can occur year-round on the average winter consumption side, because those take longer to implement and are not as responsive to immediate price signals and as the others would be. The last slide gives you an example. When you look at the left side, you see that is the 10% reduction. You see to the right side the 30% reduction. Pricing is a trailing factor, meaning that people see the results of their compliance or non-compliance with the conservation efforts after they have used the water. It's after they have used it. So you see the red, how the pricing signals are trailing their use. So it's important, of course, to have education. Education helps encourage conservation in advance of use. Enforcement, you observe the use that is supposed to not occur as it occurs, and so enforcement tackles the problem as you see it occurring to move them into conservation, and pricing is trailing. So you see all three of these together to achieve the objective. But we can go in and bring back alternatives if there are other percentages you'd like to see or other scenarios that could be more readily implemented. We can bring back other options for you to consider, but this gives you the range of options that are available.
Mr. Chairman, we historically had for the last, I think since '86, we've had a single volume rate. And it's about as simple of rate structure as you can. As a matter of fact, in the wastewater, we only had a base rate. I don't know when we added that, 10 years ago?
08, I think it was.
Yeah, so 5 years ago. And I'm in favor of an inclining block rate. I think it's the right thing to do at this point in time. But I think simple may be better as we go forward. And I see that the handout you've given us with some of the metro rates in the area, where they're not basing that upon their winter base rates. It's just a straightforward block rate approach. And as we go into this, I would suggest we phase into going something along those lines and not having working off the winter base rates for our customers. I think a simpler approach, at least to get into this concept, may be better than a more complicated approach.
I agree. People don't understand our water rates now. We put something like this out on the table, you'd have to hire a lot of people to explain things, and you still wouldn't make much progress. I think this ought to be a last resort. I think we ought to examine some other conservation issues we can put in. And I agree with Mr. Couch that block rates are probably the answer, but I think we ought to, in an effort to be fair to all concerned, we ought to put into effect all the other conservation methods we can.
Well, I don't think it's an either or. I think we need to do both.
Well, but I think this ought to be the last thing we put in it. I don't think we ought to start with this. I think because that indicates that we have an emergency situation, I think. We ask for more money. Why do we ask for more money? People are using less of our product.
Well, but Brett talked about it being revenue neutral, or
in the long run,
it could be based upon the assumptions that you have, right?
But he also talked about increasing, using some of the excess for CIP work. I don't think that ought to be part of our consideration at all. I think we ought to forget about even saying something like that, because the logical conclusion is they're raising rates so they can do more. We have a situation where we have less to sell because of the drought. And now the people who are using it, we want to charge them more for it. I'm not sure that would work in anything other than a restricted monopoly like we've got here.
Any other comments? Well, I am, for one, in favor of a simple solution. However, I'm not so sure I'm willing to wait, especially if we're talking about a revenue neutral system. I'm not sure I'm willing to wait until the situation gets much worse before we do it, because I don't want it to be implemented, frankly, as a crisis. I want it to be implemented as part of a long-term idea that this is how we're going to do it. Well, now, and I'm not sure I understand it well enough now to say which way I want to go, but I'm looking for a longer-term, simple solution if both those things are possible at the same time.
Which is what Jim was talking about in terms of a simple rate structure that discourages excessive use.
And
The more you use, the more you pay on a unit basis.
And an increasing block rate is not a radical concept. I mean, as you can see, there's 6 or 7 cities in the metro area that do it, and I know a lot of major cities that do that.
Price signals are powerful. I mean, watch gasoline consumption. When gas gets up to $4 a gallon, people consume less, right?
But and even if the blocks are not significantly different, it's just a little bit higher, it's still a message out there toward Mr. White's constant conservation message that it shouldn't just be Mr. White, it should be all of ours.
Which was where I was going with my questions earlier as to when are we going to implement, how are we telling people, how will they know? Because the concern is, the lagging issue concerns me greatly, that if the bills go up and they don't really understand why, right, because it is hard to understand, it's not a simple and direct thing. I think we need to let people know, and quite frankly, I didn't realize that there wasn't a rising rate, if you will, for large consumers, because in fact, it's not, we don't want to give you a volume discount as a residential consumer for sucking an extra 10,000 gallons into your house every year.
Prior to 1986, it was just the opposite.
We did have, you're correct.
Yeah. And what was the motivation for changing it then?
Well, back then we weren't even breaking even. We were losing money and then giving you a price break if you took more.
Right.
Well, good. I'm glad you guys made those changes.
That's exactly what.
Thank you for that.
Cody figured that out for the electric business since the same time.
Yeah.
Yeah.
I think it's really going to be hard to design a simple revenue-neutral system. Because if it's simple, then you're going to generate more revenue, because you don't have this complicated process to explain to a customer who's already mystified why there's all these numbers on his water bill anyway.
Well,
it's been done, and a lot of other folks have done it. Other folks have gone from a single volumetric rate to an increasing block. Sure. And made some assumptions on and it.
Well, again,
it can be. I'm not saying it's going to be perfect, Mr. Ryan, but we wouldn't be plowing the.
Well, but we can certainly true up those numbers over time and look at them annually and see what happened. And because the thing I've learned is that when you try and regulate prices and consumer behavior, you are constantly surprised at the actual results. Very rarely are they as you think they would be, and so it makes sense for us to tell people, look, if you're going to use large amounts of water, it's going to cost you more because we're in a drought. Fair enough. So we lay it out there, and then I think we watch closely what the reactions are. Did we move the needle on consumption at all? Did people suddenly yell and scream? Were we able to reduce per capita consumption? I mean, the other side of this is we're growing as a community. And I guarantee you we'll be consuming more water 5 years from now, and 10 years from now, and 25 years from now. The issue is, what are we doing on a per capita basis, and how are we encouraging people to be reasonable about that?
And price signals are a great way to encourage people to take an action. The only thing it doesn't work on is funerals. If you lower the cost of funerals, the same number of people will die.
Mr. Chairman and trustees, we do have the cost of service request for qualifications that we've received 6 offerings, and we will be bringing you a recommended shortlist and an RFP at the next meeting. And that process will develop alternative rate options. Each will be revenue neutral for you to consider as a part of that. The drought surcharge approach is a bridge process, a transition process that can be implemented quickly if needed while you're awaiting the finalization of a cost of service process to provide you full cost of service based alternative options.
Mm-hmm. I guess I'm having some problems with the idea of a drought service a surcharge for drought. I think that I would rather come up with a system that rewards people for using less, doesn't change the total amount of money. It's not we're doing all right with the amount of revenue we have now. I'm not looking to raise revenue, but I am looking to compensate or reward people that use less and make people that use more pay more. I mean, I think that over the long run, that's going to drive down total consumption, I think, per capita consumption.
And I think you made a good point, but I don't think you're going to have an awful hard time developing a revenue-neutral system that allows you to do what you suggested. And it may not need to be revenue-neutral.
Well, I agree that it would be difficult, but I don't know that trying to do that on the front side is more difficult than trying to explain why the rates move around and what would be the trigger for a drought, how long do we have to go without rain, how low's the water table got to be before we do it.
How far in advance do you have to declare it to implement a billing change of that kind of issue? That was my concern.
Right, and if it rains in the meantime, well then...
Let's talk about revenue neutral for a second. It's a concept that I think is a good concept, and it's a good concept to be our message and our goal. But it's never going to be revenue neutral. It's only always going to be a little more. And an example of that is that our revenues fluctuate greatly every year depending upon the weather. Right. Rainfall events bring our revenue down. Drought years bring our revenue up. So, you're talking about a revenue neutral scenario during an average year is what your goal would be to achieve that. And so you can make good assumptions and have something that makes some sense. But it's never going to be actually revenue neutral because the weather itself will throw it off. Outside of, as we try to influence people's usage behaviors and trying to see how that goes, we'll only be able to put in a reasonable approach on this, a reasonable recommendation, and then true it up over time.
That's the key, is we pick a number and we go with it, and then we watch and see, and if we overshoot, okay, we back it up, right? But in the meantime, we're looking for that behavioral response, and did we tweak it enough that we got people's attention such that they move back? I mean, we may find that we may have to take it a lot higher than we thought we would have to take it to get the needle to move. So I'm with Jim on that one. I think we pick a relatively simple structure and look at something and then implement, and then because we're going to have to do something this summer, correct?
Yes.
I mean, that's certainly our concern, right? And if that's the case, then the sooner we can get working on something.
But after the chairman's comments and some of the other things I've heard today, we don't have to do anything right now. We've got enough water in our reservoirs to handle the demand we have. What we're trying to do is to build a conservation mindset to people.
Exactly.
So I don't think we ought to wait till we have a shortage to implement these plans.
No. What I'm saying is that I think we have a reason to go forward now with this for all the proper long-term reasons we've talked about. What helps from a messaging standpoint is that people can look at Lake Hefner and see the expanding shoreline and understand the concepts of water supply, and we're down, and it's seasonal or whatever it might be, cyclical is perhaps a better word, and let's use that as an opportunity to change our structures and then hopefully change behavior with that, because you've got this very obvious condition.
The public would most generally understand this better in a drought year than they would in a water-rich year.
Right.
Right. Anything further?
Thank you very much for your feedback. That was very helpful.
Next item, citizens to be heard.
Councilman, can we go back just 1 second, back to the first item under the general manager reports, and that's the bond ratings that came in. I think we really should highlight that a little bit for the utility B AAA rated stable and AA1 rated stable in this economic times is really remarkable, and over the years that rating has grown, and it's nice that the Water Trust has a better rating than the federal government does. It's a strong statement, and it's true.
I was wondering if you were going to make that record.
Well, and so I think we should acknowledge that it's a lot of things that factor that it's a stable community. It's a lot of the community things that we influence that are outside our control, but it's a lot of the financial decisions that we make here that also have allowed us to maintain that.
Do we have a feel for what the range might be at the pricing of this? I mean, what currently is financing it at this rating going for?
The range has been in the range of 3.5 to 4, and they're not going to narrow it down any further than that.
Okay. And so for those of you who have been here longer, what were some of the higher rates that we used to pay?
When we sold McGee Creek bonds, I remember we said it was sold at between 6.3 and 6.4, and we thought it'd never be that low again.
Okay.
But the refunding, we're also planning on refunding, of course, in this issue, and the refunding will be affordable.
Sure. No,
We're very excited.
it's a huge opportunity we shouldn't miss.
Anything further? Citizens be heard. We're adjourned. Thank you.